By the time he heard of his arrival, Darius had already assembled his forces from all directions and made everything ready for battle. He had fashioned swords and lances much longer than his earlier types, because it was thought Alexander had had a great advantage in this respect. He had also constructed 200 scythe-bearing chariots, well designed to astonish and terrify the enemy. From each of these there projected out beyond the trace horses scythes 3 spans long, attached to the yoke and presenting their cutting edges to the front. At the axle housings there were 2 more scythes pointing straight out with their cutting edges turned toward the front like the others, but longer and broader. Curved blades were fitted to the ends of these. All of the force the king adorned with shining armor and with brilliant commanders. As he marched out of Babylon, he had with him 800,000 infantry and no less than 200,000 cavalry. He had in mind to deploy for battle in the vicinity of Nineveh, since the plains there were well suited to his purpose and afforded ample maneuver room for the huge forces at his disposal. Pitching camp at a village named Arbela, he drilled his troops daily and made them well disciplined by continued training and practice. He was most concerned lest some confusion should arise in the battle from the numerous peoples assembled who differed in speech. On the other hand, just as he previously sent envoys to Alexander to treaty for peace, offering to concede to him the land west of the Halys River and also to give him 20,000 talents of silver, but Alexander would not agree. So now again Darius sent other envoys praising Alexander for his generous treatment of Darius's mother and the other captives and inviting him to become a friend. He offered him all the territory west of the Euphrates, 30,000 talents of silver, and the hand of one of his daughters. Alexander would become Darius's son-in-law and occupy the place of a son, while sharing in the rule of the whole empire. Alexander brought together all his friends into a council and laid before them the alternatives. He urged them each to speak his own mind freely. None of the rest, however, dared to give an opinion in a matter of this importance. But Parmenion spoke up and said, "If I were Alexander, I should accept what was offered and make a treaty." Alexander cut in and said, "So should I, if I were Parmenion." He continued with proud words and refuted the arguments of the Persians, preferring glory to the gifts which were extended to him. Then he told the envoys that the earth could not preserve its plan and order if there were 2 suns, nor could the inhabited world remain calm and free from war so long as 2 kings shared the rule. He bade them tell Darius that, if he desired the supremacy, he should do battle with him to see which of them would have sole and universal rule. If, on the other hand, he despised glory and chose profit and luxury with a life of ease, then let him obey Alexander, but be king over all other rulers, since this privilege was granted him by Alexander's generosity. Alexander dismissed the council, and ordering his forces to resume their march, he advanced on the camp of the enemy. Darius heard Alexander's answer and gave up any hope of a diplomatic settlement. He continued drilling his troops each day and brought their battle discipline to a satisfactory state. Casting over in his mind the number of the Persian forces and the decisive nature of the impending battle, since success or failure lay now entirely in the strength of their arms, Alexander lay awake throughout the night, occupied with concern for the next day. About the morning watch he fell asleep, and slept so soundly that he could not be awakened when the sun rose. At first his friends were delighted, thinking that the king would be all the keener for battle for his thorough relaxation. As time passed, however, and sleep continued to possess him, Parmenion, the senior among the friends, issued on his own responsibility the order to the troops to make ready for battle. And since his sleep continued, the friends came to Alexander and at last succeeded in waking him. As all expressed astonishment at the matter and pressed him to tell the reason for his unconcern, Alexander said that Darius had freed him from all anxiety by assembling all his forces into one place. Now, in one day, the decision would be reached on all issues, and they would be saved toils and dangers extending over a long period of time. On the right wing, Alexander stationed the royal squadron under the command of Cletus the Black, as he was called, and next to this the other friends under the command of Parmenian's son Philotas. Then in succession the other 7 squadrons under the same commander. Behind these was stationed the infantry battalion of the Silver Shields, distinguished for the brilliance of their armor and the valor of their men. They were led by Nicanor, the son of Parmenion. As for the cavalry, the line of the squadrons which I have mentioned was continued with the combined Peloponnesian and Achaean horse, then cavalry from Phthiotis and Malis, then Locrians and Phocians, all under the command of Regius of Mytilene. Next were posted the Thessalians, who had Philip as their commander. They were far superior to the rest in their fighting qualities and in their horsemanship, and next to these he stationed the Cretan archers and the mercenaries from Achaea. On both flanks he kept his wings back so that the enemy with their superior numbers could not envelop the shorter line of the Macedonians. Against the threat of the scythe chariots, he ordered the infantry of the phalanx to join shields as soon as these went into action against them, and to beat their shields with their spears, creating such a din as to frighten the horses into bolting to the rear, or if they persevered, to open gaps in their ranks, such that they might ride through harmlessly. He himself took personal command of the right wing, and advancing obliquely, planned to settle the issue of the battle by his own actions. Darius based his formation for battle on the characteristics of his national contingents, and posting himself opposite Alexander, gave the command to advance on the Macedonians. As the lines approached each other, the trumpeters on both sides sounded the attack, and the troops charged each other with a loud shout. First, the scythe chariots swung into action at full gallop, and created great alarm and terror among the Macedonians, especially since Mazaeus, in command of the cavalry, made their attack more frightening by supporting with dense squadrons of horse, as the phalanx joined shields. However, all beat upon their shields with their spears, as the king had commanded, and a great din arose. As the horses shied off, most of the chariots were turned about and bore hard with irresistible impact against their own ranks. Others continued on against the Macedonian lines, but as the soldiers opened in wide gaps, the ranks of the chariots were channeled through these. In some instances, the horses were killed by javelin casts, and in others they rode through and escaped, but some of them, using the full force of their momentum and applying their steel blades effectively, wrought death among the Macedonians in many and various forms. Such was the keenness and the force of the scythes, ingeniously contrived to do harm, that they severed the arms of many, shields and all, and in no small number of cases they cut through necks and sent heads tumbling to the ground, with the eyes still open and the expression of the face unchanged, and in other cases they sliced through ribs with mortal gashes and inflicted a quick death. As the main bodies now neared each other, and employing bows and slings and throwing javelins, expended their missiles, they turned to hand fighting. The cavalry first joined battle, and as the Macedonians were on the right wing, Darius, who commanded his own left, led his kinsman cavalry against them. These were men chosen for courage and for loyalty, the whole 1,000 included in one squadron. Knowing that the king was watching their behavior, they cheerfully faced all the missiles which were cast in their direction. With them were engaged the apple bearers, brave and numerous, and in addition to these the Mardi and Kosei, who were admired for their strength and daring, as well as all the household troops belonging to the palace and the best fighters among the Indians. They all raised a loud battle cry, and, attacking, engaged the enemy valiantly and pressed hard against the Macedonians because of their superior numbers. During this time, also, part of the cavalry of Darius, in superior numbers, continued their pressure on the opposing Macedonians and forced them to give ground. This was a second success for the Persians, and Alexander saw that it was time for him to offset this by his own intervention with the royal squadron and the rest of the elite horse guards, and rode hard against Darius. The Persian king received their attack, and fighting from a chariot, hurled javelins against his opponents, and many supported him. As the kings approached each other, Alexander flung a javelin at Darius and missed him, but struck the driver standing beside him and knocked him to the ground. A shout went up at this from the Persians around Darius, and those at a greater distance thought that the king had fallen. They were the first to take flight, and they were followed by those next to them. And steadily, little by little, the solid ranks of Darius's guard disintegrated. As both flanks became closed, the king himself was alarmed and retreated. The flight thus became general. Dust raised by the Persian cavalry rose to a height, and as Alexander's squadrons followed on their heels, because of their numbers and the thickness of the dust, it was impossible to tell in what direction Darius was fleeing. The air was filled with the groans of the fallen, the din of the cavalry, and the constant sound of lashing whips. At this time, Mazaeus, the commander of the Persian right wing, with the most and the best of the cavalry, was pressing hard on those opposing him. But Parmenion, with the Thessalian cavalry and the rest of his forces, put up a stout resistance. For a time, fighting brilliantly, he even seemed to have the upper hand thanks to the fighting qualities of the Thessalians. But the weight and numbers of Mazaeus' command brought the Macedonian cavalry into difficulties. A great slaughter took place, and despairing of withstanding the Persian power, Parmenion sent off some of his horsemen to Alexander, begging him to come to their support quickly. They carried out their orders with dispatch, but finding that Alexander was already in full pursuit at a great distance from the battlefield, they returned without accomplishing their mission. Nevertheless, Parmenion handled the Thessalian squadrons with the utmost skill, and finally, killing many of the enemy, routed the Persians, who were by now much disheartened by the withdrawal of Darius. Darius was a clever strategist. He took advantage of the great cloud of dust and did not withdraw to the rear like the other barbarians, but swinging in the opposite direction and covering his movement by the dust, got away safely himself and brought all his troops into villages which lay behind the Macedonian position. Finally, all the Persians had fled, and as the Macedonians kept slaughtering the stragglers, before long the whole region in which the battle had taken place was covered with dead. On the Persian side in the battle fell, cavalry and infantry together, more than 90,000. About 500 of the Macedonians were killed, and there were very many wounded. Of the most prominent group of commanders, Hephaestion was wounded with a spear thrust in the arm. He had commanded the bodyguards. Perdiccas and Coenus of the generals group were also wounded, so also Menidas and others of the higher commanders. That was the outcome of the Battle of Gaugamela.